The courtroom buzzed with murmurs and restless energy as people settled into their seats. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches. Reporters scribbled notes in anticipation, while spectators whispered among themselves about what was to come. At the center of it all stood Marcus Johnson, a young man whose calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside him. Dressed in a neatly pressed shirt borrowed from his uncle, Marcus looked both out of place and determined. He wasn't just fighting for freedom, he was fighting for respect. Across the room, Charles Whitmore strode in like a king entering his throne room. His tailored suit gleamed under the light, and his polished shoes clicked against the floor with every confident step. Whitmore had built his career on winning cases, often by exploiting weaknesses in those less fortunate than himself. To him, this trial was no different. It was another opportunity to flex his legal muscles and remind everyone why he was considered one of the best. But there was something else about Whitmore that made people uneasy. His blatant disdain for anyone who didn't fit his narrow view of success. It wasn't uncommon for him to mock defendants during trials, especially if they were poor or came from minority backgrounds. Marcus's case seemed straightforward enough. He was accused of vandalizing the side of a wealthy businessman's property, with graffiti reading "Justice Now." The prosecution claimed Marcus harbored resentment toward successful individuals and used the act as a way to lash out. Whitmore, true to form, immediately latched onto this narrative. As soon as the judge called the court to order, Whitmore began laying the groundwork for his argument. With a smirk plastered across his face, he addressed the jury, painting Marcus as an angry, uneducated troublemaker incapable of understanding the gravity of his actions. But Marcus wasn't fazed. Standing at the defendant's table, he took deep breaths, focusing on the task ahead. This wasn't his first time facing adversity. Growing up in a low-income neighborhood had taught him how to stay strong when others doubted him. Still, he couldn't deny the weight of the situation. Representing himself in court felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Every word he said could either save him or seal his fate. Yet, despite the odds stacked against him, Marcus believed in his innocence and he believed in the power of truth. As Whitmore continued his opening statement, his tone grew increasingly condescending. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, leaning casually on the podium as though he owned the space. "We are here today because of one individual's reckless disregard for property and authority. Mr. Johnson." He paused dramatically, turning to look directly at Marcus. "Is not what you'd call a pillar of society. No college degree, no stable job, no ties to the community worth mentioning. What we have here is a young man who thinks rules don't apply to him." A ripple of discomfort passed through the courtroom. Some shifted awkwardly in their seats, while others exchanged glances, unsure whether to agree or object. Marcus kept his gaze steady, refusing to let Whitmore's words rattle him. Inside, however, anger simmered. How dare this man reduce his entire life to stereotypes? Marcus knew better than anyone how hard he'd worked to rise above his circumstances. From helping his mom pay bills after his father left to volunteering at local shelters, he'd spent years proving his worth, not for accolades, but because he genuinely cared about making a difference. When it was finally Marcus's turn to speak, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him, some curious, others skeptical. For a moment, even Marcus felt the pressure bearing down on him. Could he really do this? Could he stand toe-to-toe with someone as experienced and ruthless as Whitmore? Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, "I understand that I might not look like the typical person you see in this position. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have fancy degrees hanging on my wall. But what I do have is the truth, and a belief that justice should belong to everyone, regardless of where they come from." His words hung in the air, resonating more deeply than anyone expected. Even Whitmore raised an eyebrow, momentarily caught off guard by Marcus's poise, but the seasoned attorney quickly recovered, brushing off the comment with a dismissive chuckle. "Ah, yes, the truth," Whitmore quipped, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "How noble. Let's hope your version of the truth holds up as well as your spray paint did on that wall." The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter, though it was clear many found Whitmore's remark distasteful. Marcus clenched his fists briefly beneath the table, then relaxed them. Losing his temper wouldn't help him now. Instead, he chose to channel his frustration into focus. If Whitmore wanted to play games, so be it. But Marcus was ready to show, him and everyone else, that he was far more than the caricature Whitmore tried to paint. As the trial moved into its next phase, the tension between the two men became palpable. Whitmore strutted around the courtroom like a peacock, basking in his perceived dominance. Meanwhile, Marcus remained seated, quietly observing every detail, every nuance of Whitmore's strategy. Unbeknownst to Whitmore, Marcus had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Late nights spent poring over legal texts, countless hours rehearsing arguments in front of a mirror, and endless conversations with friends who encouraged him. All of it had led to this day. And though the odds were still against him, Marcus knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going down without a fight. The courtroom grew quieter as Whitmore confidently called his first witness to the stand. It was a security guard named Roger, who claimed he had seen Marcus near the scene of the vandalism late at night. Roger adjusted his cap nervously as he took his seat, but Whitmore quickly put him at ease with a warm smile and a firm handshake. To anyone watching, it seemed like Whitmore had everything under control. His questions were sharp and calculated, designed to lead Roger exactly where he wanted him to go. "Mr. Roger," Whitmore began, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "Can you tell us what you observed on the night in question?" Roger nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I was doing my rounds around 11 p.m., and I saw this young man, Marcus, I think his name is, near the side of the building. He had a backpack slung over his shoulder and something bulky in his hand. At first I thought maybe he was just passing by, but then I noticed him crouching down and spraying something onto the wall." Whitmore's lips curled into a satisfied grin. This was going perfectly. "And did you happen to see what he was spraying?" "Yes, sir," Roger replied without hesitation. "It looked like graffiti. Big letters saying 'Justice Now.' I didn't get too close because it was dark, but I'm sure it was him." The prosecution team exchanged smug glances, while Whitmore turned to the jury, raising his eyebrows as if to say, "See? Case closed." The spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some nodding along, others frowning at the implications. For a moment it felt like the trial might end right there. After all, how could Marcus possibly counter such a detailed account? But Marcus wasn't about to let Whitmore's theatrics win the day. When it was his turn to cross-examine Roger, he stood up calmly, his expression unreadable. He walked slowly toward the witness stand, giving himself time to gather his thoughts. Then, with a polite nod to Roger, he began speaking. "Good morning, Mr. Roger," Marcus said warmly, his tone friendly but firm. "Thank you for being here today. Let's talk a little more about what you saw that night, shall we?" Roger blinked, caught off guard by Marcus's composed demeanor. Sure. You mentioned it was dark when you saw me, when you saw someone near the building. Can you describe the lighting conditions a bit more? Was there a street lamp nearby? Or maybe floodlights illuminating the area?" Roger hesitated, scratching his head. "Well, there was a street lamp a few feet away, but it wasn't very bright, and the building itself doesn't have any outdoor lights on that side." Marcus nodded thoughtfully as though considering this information carefully. "So, would you say visibility was poor? Difficult to make out details clearly?" "I guess so," Roger admitted reluctantly. "It wasn't pitch black, but yeah, it wasn't great." "Okay, thank you," Marcus replied smoothly. "Now, you also said you saw someone crouching down and spraying something onto the wall. How far away were you from this person when you made that observation? Maybe 30 or 40 feet? Roger guessed, squinting as if trying to recall the exact distance. 30 or 40 feet, Marcus repeated slowly, letting the number sink in. "And yet, despite the darkness and the distance, you're absolutely certain it was me you saw? Not someone else wearing similar clothes or carrying a similar bag?" Roger shifted in his seat, growing visibly uneasy. I'm pretty sure it was you. Like I said, I saw your face." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but probing. "Interesting. Because according to city ordinances, surveillance, Cameras are required to cover all entrances and exits of commercial properties after sunset. Did you happen to review any footage from those cameras before testifying today? The question hung in the air like a bombshell. Roger's eyes widened, and he glanced nervously at Whitmore, who suddenly looked less confident than he had moments earlier. No, I didn't, Roger stammered. I don't know anything about cameras. I see, Marcus said gently, turning back to the jury. So, to summarize, you saw someone from a significant distance, in poor lighting conditions, and you didn't verify your observation with available evidence such as security footage. Is that correct? Roger swallowed hard. I suppose so. Thank you, Mr. Roger, Marcus concluded with a small smile. No further questions. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as Marcus returned to his seat. People leaned forward, whispering excitedly to one another. Had they just witnessed a rookie take down a seasoned witness? Whitmore, meanwhile, looked furious. His cheeks flushed red, and he shot Marcus a glare that could cut glass. But instead of backing down, Whitmore doubled down on his strategy, launching into a sarcastic tirade. Well, he sneered, addressing the jury. Looks like we've got a real legal expert on our hands. Maybe next time Mr. Johnson can teach us all a lesson about proper courtroom etiquette. Perhaps he learned these tricks from watching TV dramas. The remark drew a few chuckles from Whitmore's supporters, but most of the room remained silent. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by Whitmore's attempt to deflect attention from the glaring holes in his case. Marcus simply smiled faintly, refusing to rise to the bait. Inside, however, he felt a surge of pride. He knew Whitmore's insults were a sign of desperation, a crack in the armor of someone who always expected to win. As the trial continued, Marcus kept finding ways to dismantle Whitmore's arguments. During another round of questioning, he pointed out inconsistencies in the timeline provided by the prosecution. According to police reports, the vandalism occurred between 10:45 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. Yet, Marcus produced receipts showing he had purchased snacks at a convenience store nearly 2 miles away at 10:30 p.m. Furthermore, he highlighted discrepancies in the description of the alleged vandal. While Roger claimed the person he saw was wearing a hoodie and jeans, other witnesses described someone in a jacket and sweatpants. Each revelation chipped away at Whitmore's case, leaving him increasingly flustered. For the first time in his career, he found himself struggling to maintain control. Every time he tried to undermine Marcus with snide comments, Marcus responded with logic and clarity, turning the courtroom into a masterclass in composure versus arrogance. By the time the prosecution rested its case, the atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. What started as a seemingly open and shut trial now felt like anything but. Spectators whispered among themselves, marveling at Marcus's ability to hold his ground against a powerhouse like Whitmore. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even Whitmore couldn't deny the change in momentum. As he sat at his table, flipping through papers and muttering under his breath, he realized he had underestimated Marcus and paid the price. The young man standing across from him wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was proving that intelligence, determination, and integrity could triumph over prejudice and hubris. For Marcus, this wasn't just about winning the case. It was about showing the world that people shouldn't be judged by their appearance or background. It was about standing tall in the face of injustice and refusing to let fear dictate his actions. And as he prepared to present his defense, he knew he still had one final card to play, a revelation that would leave everyone speechless. As the trial moved into its defense phase, Marcus took center stage. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with anticipation since his earlier takedown of Whitmore's witnesses, fell silent. Everyone leaned forward slightly in their seats, eager to see what this young man would do next. Even Whitmore, who had spent most of the trial smirking and scoffing at Marcus's efforts, couldn't hide a flicker of unease as Marcus stood up to present his case. Marcus began by thanking the judge and jury for their patience. His voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight, commanding attention without raising it. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he said, "I want to start by saying that I'm not here to convince you of anything other than the truth. Today, I'll show you evidence, not opinions or assumptions, that proves my innocence. With that, Marcus turned toward the gallery and gestured for someone to step forward. A middle-aged woman wearing a bright yellow blouse walked up to the front of the room. She introduced herself as Linda Harper, the organizer of a community event Marcus had attended on the night of the alleged vandalism. Linda explained that Marcus had volunteered at a local youth empowerment seminar held at a community center, miles away from the crime scene. Marcus was there helping kids write poems and design posters about social justice, Linda said warmly. He stayed until nearly midnight, working alongside volunteers and mentoring students. There's no way he could have been anywhere near that building at the time of the vandalism. To back up her testimony, Marcus presented photographs taken during the event. In one picture, Marcus stood surrounded by teenagers holding handmade signs that read messages like "Change starts with us" and "Equality for all." Another photo showed him laughing while painting a mural with the group. The images were undeniable proof of where Marcus had been and what he'd been doing on the night in question. But Marcus wasn't done yet. After Linda stepped down, he pulled out another piece of evidence: screenshots of private emails between two businessmen. One of them was the victim in this case, Mr. Thompson, and the other was a rival entrepreneur named Victor Langston. The emails revealed a heated feud over property ownership and business competition. In one particularly damning exchange, Langston threatened to make life difficult for Thompson if he didn't back off a lucrative deal. "This is important," Marcus explained, pacing slowly in front of the jury, "because the graffiti found on Mr. Thompson's property doesn't seem random. It has meaning. Justice now isn't just a slogan, it's a message tied directly to the conflict between these two men. And when we consider the timing of the vandalism, along with the evidence showing I wasn't even near the scene, it becomes clear who actually benefits from framing me." The courtroom erupted in murmurs again, but this time they weren't whispers of doubt. They were gasps of astonishment. People exchanged wide-eyed looks, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the judge leaned forward, studying the documents Marcus had submitted with renewed interest. Whitmore, however, wasn't ready to concede defeat. He jumped to his feet, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These emails are hearsay, and there's no credible source linking them to my client's case." The judge raised a hand to silence him. "Mr. Whitmore, I'll allow it for now. Let's hear how the defense intends to connect these dots." Marcus nodded respectfully before continuing. "Thank you, Your Honor. To clarify, I'm not suggesting these emails alone prove guilt. What I am saying is that they provide motive, a motive far stronger than any claim made against me. Meanwhile, the prosecution hasn't offered a single shred of physical evidence tying me to the crime. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. Just vague accusations based on circumstantial observations." By now, Whitmore looked visibly rattled. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he struggled to regain control of the narrative. But Marcus wasn't finished delivering his knockout blow. As he wrapped up his presentation, he decided to share something deeply personal, an act of vulnerability that would leave the entire courtroom stunned. "I know some of you might wonder why I'm representing myself today," Marcus admitted, his voice softening. "Why didn't I hire a lawyer? Why take such a risk? The truth is, I couldn't afford one. My mom fell ill years ago, and I dropped out of Harvard Law School to help pay her medical bills. It broke my heart to leave behind something I loved so much, but family comes first. Still, I never stopped learning. I never stopped believing that justice should be accessible to everyone, not just those with money or power." A hush fell over the room. Eyes welled up with tears as people realized the depth of Marcus's struggle. Here was a young man who had sacrificed everything to care for his loved ones, only to be dragged into court and ridiculed for lacking resources. Yet despite all the obstacles, he had risen to the occasion, proving himself smarter, braver, and more honorable than anyone expected. Even Whitmore seemed momentarily speechless. For the first time, his usual arrogance faltered. He glanced around the courtroom, searching for support from his team, but found none. Instead, he saw faces filled with admiration for Marcus. When Marcus concluded his statement, the room remained eerily quiet. Then, almost imperceptibly, Applause began to ripple through the gallery. Spectators clapped softly at first, then louder, until the sound echoed throughout the chamber. The judge quickly called for order, but the moment lingered in the air like electricity. As Marcus returned to his seat, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. Whether or not the jury believed him, he knew he'd given it his all. He'd fought back against prejudice and ignorance, using nothing but facts, courage, and integrity. And in doing so, he had transformed the courtroom into a stage for something bigger than himself. A reminder that true justice isn't about privilege or status, it's about fairness, accountability, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. For Whitmore, however, the battle was far from over. Though humbled by Marcus's performance, he refused to go down without a fight. As the trial approached its final stages, he scrambled to salvage what little credibility he had left. But deep down, he knew the tide had turned, and not in his favor. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the jury filed back in after hours of deliberation. Every pair of eyes followed their solemn faces, searching for any hint of what they had decided. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly. Together, though his expression remained calm. He had done everything he could. Now it was out of his hands. Across the aisle, Charles Whitmore fidgeted nervously with his tie, a rare crack in his usually polished demeanor. Even he seemed to sense that the verdict would not go his way. The foreman of the jury stood up, holding a folded piece of paper. The judge instructed him to read the decision aloud. In the matter of the People versus Marcus Johnson, the ball, foreman began, pausing briefly before continuing. We find the defendant not guilty. For a split second there was silence, then pandemonium erupted. Spectators burst into cheers, some standing up and clapping enthusiastically. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, snapping photos and jotting down notes as fast as they could. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, his shoulders sagging with relief. For the first time since the trial began, he allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that justice could prevail when given a fair chance. Whitmore, meanwhile, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His face turned pale, and his mouth hung open slightly, as if unable to process what had just happened. All around him, people whispered and gestured toward Marcus, marveling at how a young man with no formal legal training had managed to dismantle one of the city's top attorneys. Whitmore tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear his carefully constructed image of invincibility had crumbled. The judge banged her gavel several times to restore order. Once the room settled, she addressed Marcus directly. Mr. Johnson, she said, her tone unusually warm, while this court does not condone self-representation lightly, I must commend you for your diligence, preparation, and poise throughout these proceedings. You have demonstrated an extraordinary understanding of the law and a commitment to fairness that many seasoned professionals lack. I hope you will consider pursuing this passion further, whether through formal education or advocacy work. This system needs more voices like yours. Marcus nodded gratefully, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Thank you, Your Honor, he replied softly. I appreciate your words, and I'll think seriously about them. As the judge dismissed, the court reporters swarmed around Marcus, shoving microphones in his face and shouting questions. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every angle of his triumphant exit. One journalist asked, "How does it feel to beat someone like Charles Whitmore?" Marcus paused, considering his response. It feels good, not because I wanted to prove him wrong, but because I wanted to prove myself right. This case wasn't about me versus him. It was about truth versus assumptions. Justice isn't supposed to be a game where only the rich and powerful win. It's meant to protect everyone equally. Another reporter pressed him about Whitmore's behavior during the trial. Do you think Mr. Whitmore acted unethically by mocking you and dismissing your abilities based on stereotypes? Marcus sighed deeply, choosing his words carefully. I don't hold grudges. Mr. Whitmore is a product of a system that often rewards arrogance over empathy. But systems can change, and people can too. If anything, I hope this experience encourages others to look beyond appearances and give everyone a fair shot. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, cheering loudly as Marcus emerged into the sunlight. Friends, family members, and even strangers embraced him, congratulating him on his victory. Someone handed him a homemade sign that read "Justice Prevails," which drew laughter and applause from the growing throng of supporters. Marcus held it high above his head, basking in the moment while reminding himself that this wasn't just his win. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt underestimated or silenced. Back inside the courthouse, Whitmore packed up his briefcase in stunned silence. His colleagues avoided eye contact, clearly embarrassed by his defeat. As he walked out, a few reporters approached him, asking for comment. At first, he brushed them off, muttering something about needing to leave. But then, perhaps realizing he couldn't escape scrutiny forever, he stopped and faced the cameras. "I underestimated Mr. Johnson," Whitmore admitted grudgingly, his voice devoid of its usual bravado. "He proved to be a formidable opponent, and I respect his determination. That said, the legal process is complex and mistakes happen. I'll take this as a learning opportunity moving forward." Though his apology sounded hollow, it was still notable coming from someone like Whitmore. Later that evening, news outlets replayed his statement alongside clips of Marcus's eloquent responses, sparking widespread debate about bias within the justice system. Social media lit up with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Fair Courts for All," amplifying calls for reform. In the days following the trial, Marcus became a symbol of resilience and hope. Local newspapers ran feature stories on his background, highlighting his sacrifices and dreams of becoming a lawyer. Community leaders invited him to speak at events, eager to share his story with others facing similar challenges. Inspired by his journey, a group of prominent attorneys offered to mentor him pro bono, helping him navigate the path back to law school if he chose to pursue it. Meanwhile, Whitmore faced professional consequences for his conduct during the trial. A formal complaint was filed against him by the Bar Association, citing unethical behavior and prejudice. Though initially defensive, Whitmore eventually agreed to attend sensitivity training and volunteer with organizations focused on addressing systemic racism in the legal field. Some speculated this was merely damage control, but others saw it as a step toward genuine reflection and growth. As weeks passed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the whirlwind of attention surrounding him. While grateful for the support, he knew his fight wasn't over. Standing outside a community center one afternoon, he addressed a group of teenagers participating in a workshop about civil rights. "Justice isn't something you wait for," he told them earnestly. "It's something you create. Speak up when you see injustice. Stand tall when others try to knock you down. And never forget, you are stronger than anyone gives you credit for." His words resonated deeply with the audience, earning a round of applause. As he stepped away, allowing the next speaker to take the stage, Marcus glanced at the crowd one last time. Despite everything he'd endured, he felt hopeful. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he wasn't alone. Together, he and countless others were building a future where fairness wasn't the exception. It was the rule. In the weeks following the trial, Marcus's story became a beacon of hope for communities across the country. News outlets couldn't get enough of the young man who had taken on one of the legal system's most notorious attorneys, and won. Social media buzzed with admiration as people shared videos of his closing statement and photos from the community event where he'd been volunteering on the night of the alleged crime. Hashtags like Marcus Inspires and Justice for All trended nationwide, sparking conversations about systemic inequality and the importance of giving everyone a fair chance. Local leaders invited Marcus to speak at town halls, schools, and advocacy events. At first he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to step into the spotlight, but after seeing how deeply his story resonated with others, especially young people from similar backgrounds, he embraced the opportunity. Standing in front of crowds large and small, Marcus spoke passionately about resilience, education, and the power of believing in oneself. "The world will always try to tell you who you are," he often said during these talks, "but only you get to decide what you stand for." One of his most memorable appearances was at a high school in his old neighborhood. The auditorium was packed with students, many of whom looked just like Marcus had at their age, full of dreams but weighed down by doubt and hardship. As he stood on stage, sharing his journey from dropping out of Harvard Law School to defending himself in court, the room grew so quiet you could hear a pin drop. When he finished speaking, dozens of hands shot up, eager to ask questions or share their own struggles. One student asked, "What do you do when people don't believe in you?" Marcus smiled warmly before answering, "You keep going. People might not see your potential, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Every challenge you face is shaping you into someone stronger. Don't let anyone steal your belief in yourself, not even yourself." His words stuck with many of the students long after the event ended. Teachers reported an increase in attendance and engagement in classes, crediting Marcus's visit as a turning point for some of the more disheartened kids. Inspired by the impact he was having, Marcus decided to dedicate more time to mentoring young people. He partnered with local nonprofits to create workshops focused on teaching teens about their rights, public speaking, and conflict resolution. His ultimate goal? To empower them to advocate for themselves and their communities. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Marcus's victory extended far beyond his personal life. Across the nation, discussions about racism and bias within the justice system gained momentum. Legal experts praised Marcus for exposing flaws in the prosecution's case while demonstrating remarkable knowledge of the law. Some even called for reforms to ensure defendants without access to quality representation received better support. In response, several law firms launched pro bono initiatives aimed at providing free legal aid to marginalized individuals. A scholarship fund named after Marcus was established to help aspiring lawyers from underprivileged backgrounds pursue their education. Charles Whitmore, on the other hand, found himself grappling with the fallout from the trial. The formal complaint filed against him led to an investigation by the Bar Association, which ultimately resulted in mandatory ethics training and community service hours. While initially resistant, Whitmore gradually began to confront the biases that had shaped his career. During one volunteer session at a youth detention center, he met a teenager accused of theft, a case eerily reminiscent of Marcus's. Listening to the boy's story, Whitmore realized how easily assumptions could derail lives. Though it wasn't easy, he started making amends, volunteering regularly with organizations working to reform discriminatory practices in law enforcement and the judiciary. Back in Marcus's world, life continued to transform in unexpected ways. Prominent attorneys reached out offering mentorship, including a retired judge who offered to guide him through the process of reapplying to law school. Friends and strangers alike contributed to a crowdfunding campaign to cover tuition costs, raising tens of thousands of dollars within days. Despite the overwhelming support, Marcus took his time deciding whether to return to academia. For now, he remained focused on grassroots advocacy, believing that change happened not just in courtrooms but in neighborhoods and classrooms too. Months later, Marcus stood outside a bustling community center, watching a group of teenagers prepare for a mock trial competition. They were practicing arguments they'd crafted themselves, inspired by his example. One girl approached him shyly, holding a notebook filled with notes. "I want to be a lawyer someday," she confessed. "Do you think I can make it?" Marcus knelt down to meet her eye level, his expression serious yet kind. "I know you can. It won't be easy. You'll face obstacles I can't even imagine. But if you stay true to yourself and fight for what's right, nothing can stop you." As he watched her run back to join her teammates, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why he'd fought so hard, not just for his freedom but for moments like this. Moments where he could remind others that their worth wasn't determined by where they came from or what others thought of them. Their worth came from within. That evening, Marcus sat on the steps of the community center gazing at the stars. He thought about everything he'd been through, the sleepless nights preparing for court, the sting of Whitmore's insults, the joy of seeing justice served. Each experience had taught him something valuable: resilience, humility, and the unshakable belief that fairness was worth fighting for. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, a reminder that life went on, full of challenges and triumphs, waiting to unfold. Marcus smiled to himself, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. His journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. And as long as there were people willing to listen, learn, and stand up for what was right, the fight for justice would never end.